let's now start talking about communicating with a server from your Android application. How do you send a request to a server? How do you download data from a server? How do you upload data to a server? And so on. So what we are increasingly realizing is that most mobile applications are no longer standalone, which means that your application is not disconnected from the rest of the world. Many of the applications increasingly have a backend cloud that provides data for the application itself, for displaying information within the application. So this brings into play incredible set of other technologies that are beyond Android. Things like how do you communicate with a server, how do you set up a server, how do you set up the data storage on the server, and so on. So the client-server communication part, when we talk about from the Android applications perspective, involves a lot more behind the scenes than just simply the application. Now, getting into that is a whole new world in its own right. So in this course, I will give you a quick taste of some of the approaches that we can use to communicate with the server, and then we will use a simple example to illustrate some of these concepts. But I would suggest that if you are interested, then it is important to learn a lot about backend services, about client-server communication, about networking technologies, and so on, before you can proceed on to make your Android application connected to the network. Now, when you go into the networking world, you're often blasted with a whole bunch of 3 and 4 letter acronyms. HTTP, the protocol for communicating with the server, has become increasingly the de facto standard for communication between a client and a server. Then when you talk about HTTP, you are not too far away from URLs, the Uniform Resource Locators. Anything that you have on the server side that should be accessed or accessible from your Android application should have a URL associated with it. And typically the data exchange from the client to the server and vice versa is in a standardized format like JSON or XML. So these are terms that you will often hear in this world. And then you might also hear people talking about SOAP, not the one that you wash your body with, but the other kind of soap, or maybe about REST, and you hardly have any rest when you hear about it. And then you'll have people talking about GET and POST and PUT, and then you're beginning to wonder, what is it that they are talking about? Now, let me get you through a few of these acronyms through the example that we will encounter in this module. In particular, we will deal with HTTP, URLs, we'll look at JSON, and then we'll look at the GET operation to be issued to a server from a client, and so on. One important thing that you should remember is the networking operations can be unpredictable in terms of the delays that are experienced in communicating with a server. Which means that if you do your networking operations on the main UI thread, then your app is going to freeze. So never do networking operations on the main UI thread. In fact, Android prohibits you from doing networking operations on the main UI thread. If you do that, your app will crash. So this is where you need to leverage techniques that allow you to offload the work to the background. And one such technique that we will deal with is called the async task approach. Okay, so that's something that we will deal with in this course. So let's move on to the next exercise where we'll look at processing a JSON string. We'll build up the networking part of it step by step. First, we'll look at how you would process a JSON string if you're already given one within the application. Next, we'll see how we can process a JSON string if you need to read it from a local source like a file. Then we'll see how You would deal with the JSON string if you need to go to a server and fetch the JSON string. So that's where the networking part comes into the picture. And then finally, we'll look at doing asynchronous operations where you can hand over some of the work to be done in the background and then update your user interface at the right time.